Welcome, Nicole. Thanks so much for joining us on the show.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
So you both you attended a Jesuit institution and worked at that same institution. So you're coming at this from a lot of personal history, right?
I am. So I guess I
Okay.
should probably say I am a little bit biased to the Jesuit education for those reasons.
Okay. Well, I think that we can absolutely welcome that positive bias. Like, I think this show actually has a lot of people who share their positive biases. It's only the negative biases that we try and tamp down on. So yeah. So why don't you tell us quickly about sort of your own experience, and then we can transition into Jesuit colleges in general and
Sure.
like the wonderful things that they share.
Yeah, so I going into college, just to give a little background there, I didn't know what I wanted to study, and I picked a number of different places. And what was interesting was the reason I chose Holy Cross wasn't because it was a Jesuit school. It was just because I liked the atmosphere, I liked the messaging. It ended up I applied to all Catholic schools, but that also wasn't a factor in my
Mm-hmm.
process either, which is kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, I did not know about the Jesuit education until I got there. And I felt like once I stepped on campus, all of a sudden I realized, wow, this is something to embrace and to become part of, and just the philosophies. So, the philosophy at any Jesuit school is men and women for others. And so, all of a sudden, like once you get on the campus, you just realize, I want to be part of that. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
want to embrace that motto and be able to not only share with others, but also it encouraged you to become more active in your community, not only within the school itself, but also outside. So I think there were so many things. And I didn't have a core education requirement. It was more just kind of picking and choosing in different areas. And I felt like that was a key piece that our advisors at Holy Cross persuaded us to pursue. Like, it was one of those things of take a religious studies class one semester, but then try something in the art or music or theater department, but then also include poli sci and psychology and economics, and even take a chemistry class if you wanted to. But it felt like it was trying all different areas just to kind of learn where you wanted to land upon.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, because they're really my sense of Jesuit schools is that they are trying to educate you as a person.
Yes.
Obviously, your career is important and they want success for their students, but they
Yes.
want you to be an educated person.
And this was really interesting recently, and kind of a small kind of side as I was thinking about this. I was watching Stephen Colbert, and Anthony Fauci is a Holy Cross alum, and
Mm,
he was on Stephen Colbert. And for some reason, he asked him about his Jesuit education. And ironically, Anthony Fauci attended a Jesuit high school in New York City and then went to Holy Cross. He then went on to Cornell. But
mm-hmm,
as far as he was asked, what does your Jesuit education mean to you? And he said, basically, it was service to others to make the world a better place.
mm-hmm,
And he said that this has led him in everything that he does. And I found that that was, to me, so poignant. Like, I felt
mm-hmm,
like that was so significant because that's what it is about, men and women for others.
mm-hmm,
There are 28 Jesuit schools across the country, and then many kind of Jesuit, many Jesuit high schools as well around the world and in the US.
mm-hmm,
But I think that that stands true across, across the system in the US and around the world.
mm-hmm. What are some of those examples? Like, everybody's heard of Georgetown,
Yep.
and I talk to students all the time who say, well, I don't want Catholic, but Georgetown's on their list. And I'm
Yep.
like, well, Georgetown's Catholic, and they're like, yeah, but it's different. And I'm like, it's more selective. Like, I don't know that it's different, right? I mean, so why don't you kind of address that? What are some examples? And
Yeah,
yeah.
so you have Georgetown, you have Boston College, which I think sometimes students forget a little bit too. Then you have places like Holy Cross, but you have the Loyolas. So you
Mhm,
have Loyola in Baltimore, Loyola Chicago, Loyola Marymount in California, but then Loyola New Orleans down in
mhm,
Louisiana. So
mhm,
that's a cross section, like, there's the four Loyolas. Then you have places like Santa Clara, whereas I think some students don't always realize that that's another Jesuit school. you have Seattle University up in the state of Washington, and then you have Wheeling, which is in West Virginia. So places
Mhm.
like you've never heard of too, like as far as that come up on the radar screen. So it's a range of different types of schools. Even St. Louis University, that's a Jesuit
Mhm.
school. So I think it's interesting, these different types of campuses. And like, then you think of Holy Cross, like, yes, you think very religious when you hear something like Holy Cross.
Mhm.
But you have that Jesuit presence on campus. When I was it was really interesting and a great experience when I was working at Holy Cross in admissions. We actually did a tour internationally with the Jesuit schools. So as far as we traveled with other schools from around the country, and their draw was so interesting from many different countries around the world. So you see these campuses looking for many different types of students, not only in the US, but internationally.
Yeah. And I think, like, I mean, you mentioned them in all these different locations, and those locations really do impact, like Loyola Marymount in Los Angeles, which I know multiple people who went there. I've been on the campus multiple times. You can tell they're in Los Angeles. Like they have that remarkable diversity, like they have, and then like I did a graduate program at Fairfield University in Connecticut, very different field, but I was really impressed. And I'm not Catholic, like I'm not actually religiously observant at all.
Nope.
But the way I could tell as a graduate student at Fairfield that this was a Catholic institution, a Jesuit institution, was because of the emphasis on ethics. It came up in every single class.
Yep.
Like it wasn't just, and the head of the program, when she was teaching one of the classes, talked about a current crisis in the program that I was doing was organizational psychology, and a current crisis in psychology. And she addressed it head on. There was no ducking from it, and I thought that was so cool. And I really enjoyed my program there. And I got to tell you, my undergrad could not have been more of an atheist place. Like it's been called one of the most godless schools in America. I don't know. We can debate about that, but definitely not a place that attracts typically students with, who are faith affiliated in a strong way. But I really appreciated my graduate education's take on ethics as well.
Yeah. And one of my favorite examples that I always use, and I've used it with many, many students, is one of my best friends that I went to college with at Holy Cross. She was a religious studies major. It
Mhm.
ended up like she just started taking the classes, she enjoyed the areas, and that was what her final decision was. Since her graduation, she's worked in finance. So as
Mhm.
far as I use that as an example for
Mhm.
so many students to realize you really truly can major in anything and still, as far as find different pathways that don't necessarily relate to that. So as far as she had such a strong foundation in the liberal arts and then decided I want to work at Morgan Stanley. And so she, was ultimately able to find a great position in finance and has stayed in finance since. But
Mhm.
that foundation that she established at Holy Cross was wonderful in the liberal arts.
Mhm. Mhm. And so let's address head on what I know some of our listeners are thinking. Like, is a Jesuit institution a good place for a non-Catholic
Mhm.
student? I mean, I already somewhat addressed that as someone who did the graduate program,
Right.
but let's face it, an undergraduate experience is much more immersive. So, yeah, maybe you can sort of address that. Like, is there anybody that you wouldn't recommend a Jesuit institution to?
I think typically it's a very welcoming place for anyone. And I feel like, yes, you may take a class in religion. It may be one required class, but it can be in anything. Like there was a class in mysticism at Holy Cross. So like
Mm-hmm.
you could take any type of class to fulfill a requirement if there is one. And I would say that yes, at some of the Jesuit schools, it is majority Catholic, but at the same time, I think the students find their place and certainly would not feel out of place on a campus, on a Jesuit campus, because they're so welcoming.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's one of those things where I think it's so much about the environment and the fit and just kind of going to that campus and realizing, is this right for me? And almost asking the question of, would I feel out of place on this particular campus? But I think you'd have to go and actually be on the campus to know whether or not you wouldn't fit there. But I would say anyone would not anyone would find their fit on those campuses because they're so welcoming in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think some students might understandably want a larger Hillel or something, but in
Correct.
terms of being a welcoming environment, it feels like it's an emphasis of the administration and the faculty. I think that's very important to note.
It is. And I think there have been so many changes, honestly, with not just within the church that is administering these campuses, but here's an example of kind of the progression. There was always a priest who was the president of Holy Cross, and recently that changed. And I think that has kind of changed the scope of so many of these campuses as well, that I think they're looking to change perspective and looking to be even more welcoming to anyone who wants to attend these
Mhm,
campuses.
mhm. Even a couple decades ago, I think it was, I remember I was doing some research, because I've worked with a decent number of Jewish students, and, I wanna a lot of them want these kind of more mid-sized schools on the East Coast. I mean, a lot of those kinds of schools are Catholic or Jesuit. So I was researching, and, like, Boston College, for example, had hosted an event for Jewish students on Jesuit campuses,
Right.
and a colleague of ours, I remember saying, who is Jewish, said that actually she found Fordham to be more welcoming to her as an employee, mind you, but in terms of when she needed to take faith-based holidays, like they were like, great, no problem. She said they were actually more easier and more respectful of that than an institution that has a much higher Jewish population that is more secular based.
Mhm.
So that was kind of an interesting observation to me, as well. So,
Yeah, I just think as far as I think it really comes to the atmosphere, but as far as the student feels comfortable and what opportunities you can even find percentages and get an understanding of
mhm,
current students and maybe what their faith background is to know kind of what the percentages are and comfort level. But I would say that the schools are very welcoming and open and definitely have evolved over the years.
mhm. So any sort of last comments about, I mean, we have a couple minutes, so I'm just kind of wondering, like, what is the dedication to service mean in concrete ways? Like, we have the example of Dr. Fauci, and I'm kind of curious how it manifested in your life and your friends' lives. Like, how did that come out a little bit while on campus and afterwards?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think as far as a couple different ways, I know that many of my friends, like we were active in different campus activities, but one of the ways was like we were active in a Big Brothers Big Sisters program. So as far as like there was so many service components that you could get involved with, but that was just one of the opportunities where I feel like there was a huge dedication to the community of Worcester when it
Mhm,
came to our service. Um, Two opportunities that I took advantage of during spring break. There's a percentage of students that get the opportunity to do an Appalachian service project and go to different communities along the mountain chain and do different projects, whether it's building or just working in the community or assisting elderly, babysitting, whatever it was. But they would take van loads of students down during spring break to do these different service opportunities, and the vans were always full. There was never a
mhm,
lack of students that wanted to do that. And then another kind of key piece where you see the service component continuing on is the Jesuit Volunteer Corps. So what
mhm,
students will do after they graduate, no matter any school, you don't have to attend a Jesuit school to participate in the Jesuit Volunteer Corps. Very similar to an AmeriCorps type program where the students are choosing a location in the country. They are immersed into service. So they choose a job that they would like to work in that area for a year. And then they live in a community setting. So you're living with, it could be 6 to 10 individuals that all coming from different backgrounds, all coming from different areas of the country, and then you live in community and then work a typical job but in more of a service related career. So
mm,
a lot of like when I did the Jesuit Volunteer Corps in the Pacific Northwest, I was in Seattle. I worked at a day center for the elderly during that time, and my roommates worked in homeless shelters or in different types of systems throughout the city of Seattle. And then we all kind of lived in one home and ate meals together and prepared together. And that was a great way to really learn, but also to give back. And I always feel like opportunities like that are such growth opportunities. And I feel like if I was to make a plug again for a Jesuit education, it would be it's really a time to grow and learn, and there's definitely things I have learned not only as an undergrad student, but also in my time of service that I feel like I carry through with every day, just in the dedication to kind of thinking about the lifestyles that you have and how, as far as the dedication to others. So I really think that it's really preparing you for the future in so many different ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. Any last words? It sounds like maybe that was it. Like, take a look at the college and
Take a
don't make
look.
assumptions about it. But if you have that commitment to service and you want to learn more about, I don't know, I feel like an ethical structure for viewing the world, that's going to be in
Yes.
plentiful supply there.
And I think as far as, look, yes, you're going to hear about the big names and certainly like take a look at that component of the campuses and learn more about what they offer. But I would also say like if there's a location in the country that you're considering, look to see like look at the list of 28 Jesuit schools that are around the
Mhm.
country just to say maybe I'll give this do a little bit more research on this school that I didn't even know maybe was a Jesuit school to learn more about it and learn more about the atmosphere and what's offered and about the foundational structure that they offer. And I think that that's a great way to understand even more about the education that you potentially could receive.
Okay. All right. That's so wonderful. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you.
All right. So when we return, we'll be talking with Scott Alexander about colleges in and around Portland, Maine.